Morning in a medieval village began before sunrise, long before the cocks crowed and long before the market stalls were set up. The first light barely filtered through narrow, straw-thatched windows, and the village stirred slowly. Smoke curled from small hearths as women tended to fires that had burned overnight, keeping the house warm enough to survive the lingering cold. Men rose quickly to feed the animals, their bare feet touching the hard, uneven earth. Life in these small settlements was never gentle. It demanded immediate labour, constant vigilance, and an awareness that the world was indifferent to your comfort. In the cramped cottages, families were tightly packed. A single room often served as kitchen, bedroom and storage, with smoke from cooking fires making the air thick and harsh. Children rubbed their eyes and helped with chores before breakfast, carrying water from the well, feeding chickens and pigs, or fetching logs for the fire. Hygiene was minimal at best. Rivers or communal wells doubled as water sources for drinking, cooking and washing, and disease thrived in such close quarters. Even the most careful mother knew that sickness could strike overnight and kill indiscriminately. By sunrise, the village was already alive with sound and motion. Farmers trudged into fields, ploughing soil with oxen and wooden ploughs, or sowing seeds by hand. The earth was stubborn and heavy, often soaked from rain or hardened by frost, and the work was physically punishing. Sweat poured, muscles ached, and blisters tore open hands hardened by years of labour. There was no machinery to ease the load. Every seed planted was a gamble. A poor harvest meant starvation, disease, or the loss of your home. Meanwhile, the village blacksmith began his day with clanging hammers. Sparks flew as iron was hammered into ploughshares, nails, and horseshoes. The work smelled of hot metal and smoke, and the heat from the forge made even midsummer unbearable. Villagers relied on him for tools, repairs and protection. Swords and armour were scarce, and a blacksmith's skill could mean life or death during raids or accidents. His apprentices, often young boys, learnt the trade through long hours, burns and relentless instruction. There was no room for error. Breakfast was simple, sometimes barely a meal. Hard bread, porridge or leftover vegetables boiled into a watery soup. Meat was rare, reserved for special occasions or the wealthiest villagers. Salted or smoked fish might appear, but most meals were monotone in flavour and meagre in portion. Children often went hungry, and adults ate just enough to keep going. Nutrition was fragile, vitamin deficiencies were common, and illness could weaken even the strongest workers. As the day progressed, villagers moved with purpose. Women spun wool, wove cloth, and repaired clothing while keeping an eye on children. Men tilled fields, tended livestock, or repaired fences and roofs. Every task carried consequences if neglected. A fence left broken could let animals escape, destroying a family's hard-earned grain. A barn in disrepair could collapse under snow. Every mistake was costly, often fatal. Evenings brought no true respite. Once the sun began to set, the village was plunged into shadow. Candles and torches provided faint light, flickering against stone and wood walls. Families gathered for a meal, often silent in exhaustion. Stories were whispered around the hearth, legends passed from parents to children, and superstitions ruled the night. Wolves prowled the forests nearby, and bandits sometimes raided travellers or small farms. Fear was constant, an uninvited guest at every table. Religious life dominated social structure. The local priest was both spiritual guide and enforcer of moral code. Sundays were sacred, yet for many peasants, attending mass meant leaving work undone, risking crops and livestock. Prayers and offerings were routine, but the line between faith and obligation blurred. Villagers believed the church could protect them from famine, illness, and death, and any deviation from expected piety could bring punishment. superstition ran deep, and many feared curses or witches lurking in nearby woods. Childhood offered no real reprieve. Boys and girls were expected to work from an early age. By 7, children tended animals, fetched water, and helped in the fields. Education was rare. Only those connected to the church or wealthy nobility learned to read and write. Play was brief, limited to a few scraps of free time, and often centered around physical skill or mimicry of adult labor. Even at play, survival lessons were implicit. Know the land, respect fire, avoid predators. Hunger was the ever-present shadow. Bad harvests meant villagers survived on roots, herbs, or acorns. In desperate winters, families boiled tree bark into bread or stretched a single loaf for days. Food scarcity drove conflict, sometimes violent. Villagers would argue over a pig, a bag of grain, or firewood, and desperation could override social bonds. Starvation was not distant, it was a daily reality lurking behind each task. Social hierarchy was rigid. Lords or local barons controlled taxes, land, and justice. Peasants worked plots they did not own, giving a portion of crops or livestock to the ruling class. Refusal could result in fines, eviction, or corporal punishment. Villagers were bound by obligation, powerless to challenge authority, yet they relied on small communities for protection and assistance. Cooperation and loyalty were survival tools. The midday sun brought both work and risk. Villagers walked long distances to markets or neighbouring settlements, carrying goods like eggs, cheese, or firewood. Roads were primitive, often muddy or overgrown, and travel exposed them to thieves, wild animals, or accidents. Journeys could take days, and a simple misstep could cost a leg, a hand, or life. Merchants and traders relied on trust, yet trust was scarce. Every transaction carried risk. Illness was an invisible predator. Without doctors or medicine, even a small infection could kill. Bloodletting, herbal remedies, and prayers were the only tools available, and their effectiveness was often accidental. Minor cuts festered. Childbirth was perilous, claiming the lives of many women and infants. Epidemics could wipe out entire villages within weeks, leaving survivors in despair. Even leisure was framed by necessity. Festivals, fairs, and seasonal celebrations offered temporary escape. Villagers danced, feasted, and sang, yet the joy was fleeting. Preparation for winter, harvest, and taxes consumed much of their energy. The boundaries between work, survival, and celebration were thin. Music and laughter were medicines in themselves, but only for a few precious hours. Conflict was unavoidable. Fights erupted over land, livestock, or honour. Neighbour disputes could escalate quickly, sometimes drawing in armed men or local lords. Peasants were rarely trained for war, but had to defend homes and families. Villages might be raided by bandits, soldiers, or rival nobles, leaving behind burnt huts, stolen livestock, and grief. Security was rudimentary. Wooden fences, watch posts, and community vigilance were all that stood between life and disaster. As night fell, darkness brought both rest and danger. Families huddled near fires for warmth, while wolves, thieves, and superstition lingered outside. Sleep was shallow, interrupted by hunger, cold, or fear. The safety of daylight was gone, replaced by uncertainty and vulnerability. Dreams were haunted by memories of hard labour, loss, or missed opportunity. Despite hardship, villages persisted. Bonds of family and community were strong. Shared labour, mutual aid, and religious faith provided cohesion. Villagers celebrated small victories, a successful harvest, a healed child, a repaired roof. Life was brutal, yes, but it was also resilient. Every day demanded courage, endurance, and skill. To survive a single day in a medieval village was an achievement in itself. By the end of the day, Exhaustion was universal. Hands were blistered, backs bent, stomachs growling. Fires burned low, animals rested, and the village fell silent under a canopy of stars. Tomorrow would bring the same struggle. Perhaps a little worse, perhaps a little better. There was no escape from toil, no pause in responsibility. Survival was the only constant. One day in a medieval village was not extraordinary. It was routine. Yet, when seen through modern eyes, the simple act of living, eating, working, protecting family, worshipping, laughing was a daily test of endurance. Every small task carried weight. Every moment of rest was earned. Life in a medieval village was unforgiving, unglamorous, and relentless. And yet, it produced a people shaped by hardship, resilience, and the stark reality of human survival. To imagine it today is almost impossible. No electricity, no doctors, no supermarkets, no insurance. Every breath was effort. Every meal was uncertain. Every night could bring cold, hunger, or death. And yet, somehow, they endured, and for centuries, villages like these formed the backbone of European civilization.